I'm sure you have heard about Edgar Allan Poe, right?
I haven't.
Why you haven't? He's like the most famous Gothic poet ever.
Yeah, well, it's not my type.
He's like so scary and has a lot of stories that has a lot of drama and dead things.
Seems like you have fun.
Well, since we're on the road of Edgar Allan Poe, the story we will be reviewing today is by him, and it's called The Pit and the Pendulum. It was first published in 1942 in the
A few moments later.
literary annual The Gift at Christmas and New Year's present for 1843. In addition, we will also be reviewing its 1961 movie adaptation directed by Roger Corman.
We have a special guest. His name is Ian Chavez. He will give you a summary of what it's about.
Thanks, Anakin. Well, this story follows the torment endured by a prisoner of the Spanish Inquisition. In the story, we never know his name, so we just know him as the narrator. And throughout the story, he's given several choices and ways to die. First, he can choose if he wants to discover the end of a bottomless pit of unknown horrors and is probably filled with rats. And if he chooses not to discover that, he can choose to be sliced up by a razor-sharp pendulum that is closing on him slowly. And if he escapes from that, he'll just get crushed by walls closing on him, covered in fire. This story is 26 pages of horror, which is inspired by fear, death, and time, and the way they are important. It is focused on physical terror and the torturing of the person more than supernatural stuff or psychological terror, because there's never any mention of ghosts or zombies or stuff of that kind. It's just a man suffering unspeakable horrors or pain, and he's just being tortured. In the story, he's just describing everything he's experiencing, like how it affects him and how he feels, which it gives us why it is a horror story. It gives away the reasons why it is a horror story. And well, you may ask yourself that, why is it a horror, you may ask? Well, Edgar Allan Poe loves to make gothic and scary novels. And when you start reading this story, you get goosebumps and you see how you will feel in that situation, how tense it is and how much it will affect you. Well, back to you, Anakin.
So having all this in mind, what do you think about it? The book isn't that bad. It's to say the truth of Poe's gothic and gory nature, and it's probably the most historical accurate story that he has ever done. It's deep read that was definitely challenges for all the guys' satisfaction and knowing we conquer yet another puzzling and confusing story from Poe.
As a team, we think this story is pretty solid on its own. Poe has a talent for storytelling, but it's just very hard to understand given the Old English type that he writes in because, well, he's from 1842. So if you want to read that, you have to be conscious that you will get confused with certain lingo that was used in that time. We all literally had to force ourselves to read this because it's a requirement for the class and the project.
Can I get you anything?
A gun.
But it was still, Anakin said, it was still pretty satisfying in the end knowing that we could read Poe and kind of understand it. So,
A lot of people dislike this type of movies or stories because of the deep meaning and confusing period language. It is really confusing to read or understand this type of Gothic literature. It might be with scary elements, but it also has a lot of deep meaning and about hell, which is not peaceful to read about.
now, moving on from the short story part, I want to ask all of you a question. How similar do you think this movie adaptation is to the original text? Because book adaptation movies can range from excellent, like The Lord of the Rings, to downright awful, like Percy Jackson and The Lightning Thief.
If you guess that it was pretty close to the sources materials, boy are you in the treat. Because the screenwriters really took one plot point and ran with it, completely ignoring the rest.
Our project is called Creative License, and the movie adaptation of this short story certainly look at its own creative license to new.
The Pit and the Pendulum movie from 1961, starring Vincent Price and John Kerr, is probably the campiest movie of all time.
But wait, what does being camp mean?
Well, for all of you that don't know what being camp means, designer Dame Zandra Rhodes describes it like something that's over the top in its concept, that wouldn't go unnoticed and that has a sense of humor about it. It's not mainstream and it's joyous or out of the ordinary.
So basically, it's something sophisticated that assumes even bordering on tacky extravaganza but still makes it fashionable.
That's right. So now that we have that cleared, let's dive into this beautiful mess of a movie with the help of yet again our special guest, Ian Chubb.
Thanks again, Clap. So the movie starts with a scene introducing us to the castle, which is the place where the movie takes place. It is a scene that shows how isolated and lonely it is, with a gray and kind of stormy weather behind it, and then you have the ocean at the bottom of it, making it look like a castle of nightmares, which it actually is a castle of nightmares. After this, we meet the characters of the movie, who are Nicolas Medina and Elizabeth, who is his wife who passed away, Francis Barnard, who is Elizabeth's brother, Nicolas' sister Catherine, and the Dr. Charles Leon. This is actually a major difference from the short story to the movie, since in the short story you actually don't have more characters, it's just one, and we never know his name throughout the whole story. While in the movie you have all these characters who have an identity throughout the whole story, you know who they are. Soon after, we learn about the problem in the castle, which is being haunted by Elizabeth's spirit, and is driving Nicholas insane. But later, it turns out it was just an act put up by the very much alive Elizabeth, who's been cheating on Nicholas with Dr. Charles Leon. This drives Nicholas insane, and in this state, he kills some of the characters, and then he tortures Francis with a pit and a pendulum. Back to you, Clap.
Thank you, Ian. So after watching this movie, we concluded that it's nothing like the book and it could almost be a completely different story. Sure, there are some things similar, like the torture and the horror of the main character and what he endures, or how the pendulum symbolizes the time that is lethal and razor destroys everyone. But it's mostly just a loose take on the original text. Still, the movie made up for the lack of material in the book, because there's literally none. By having a woman come back from the dead or a man go crazy and a lot.
Granted, the story doesn't have too much work with, so I guess the screenwriters did what they could under circumstances. Either way, we all think the movie was much better than the book. Our reasons begin first. It was much more enjoyable.
Yeah, it wasn't boring at all, because the plot kept getting really ridiculous and dramatic about the death scenes, but we keep watching it and we know how it ended. Extra characters were added because the story to have a dramatic change, making it easier to understand what actually is going on. Also, they identify of how trapped in a torture it is in a castle. Why is it here unlike the story, which it takes a lot of mysterious from the original story, and it changes how the reader feels and proceeds by torturing the scene.
We had a visual representation of the settings, what the characters were doing, how though they look, etc., which helped us all.
In the end, we realized that reading Edgar Allan Poe is not for everyone.
Where the clear example of that.
What? Child. Anyway, so
You have to like a certain genre to get into his stories, and you should be able to keep up with his old way of writing. So really, it's only for the experienced readers that could really take on or tackle this.
Break to make on one stories on just watch the movie adaptation. You should probably read and watch the reviews, like this one or another one. If it is an accurate representation or not, you will know, so you don't make a fool of yourself in front of your teachers or class.
Thank you all for watching!